We were one of the first times he had Pro Dog out here. And we ended up over at Mickey's Hot Tub, and of course Phil's got a Trat, and he's got it on 35s, and I don't know, he had a 4-inch lift on it. He gets into Mickey's Hot Tub, he starts up and out, and he keeps spinning the tires, and Dan keeps telling him to add more power and go a little bit to the right. So the next thing you know, Phil spins on it, goes up, and it bounces backward. He had one of your guys' carry rear bumper or spares carriers on it. That's where it landed, sitting perfectly on a 35-inch tire. And he's hanging on the steering wheel, and he looks over at me and he says, "I think it's about time someone puts a strap on it." It was funny. I said, "Well, Phil, maybe it's time someone shut the engine off." We got a strap on him, obviously got him up and out, but typical Phil fashion, it was Katie bar the door or nothing, you know.
You guys, some of you heard the story before, some of you haven't, but Phil used to talk about his life and his money management, etc. And, you know, he used to talk about when he was, 20 years old, and he was a romantic young man, and he was all studly, and he used to go find all these women. Well, he finally found one, he fell in love with her and married her. And it lasted, 4 or 5 years maybe. And then unfortunately it didn't work out and they got divorced. And he said, "Well, this represents my income. And when I got married,
my net value
went down by about half." So Phil, he's a quick learner. So he lasted another 2 years or so and fell in love again and got married again, and that lasted, I'm not sure how long this one lasted.
That's when he had the kids with.
The one he had the kids with. So that's probably 4 or 5, 6 years. And unfortunately it didn't work out and he got married, and again, the net worth did the cut in half. And he said, he lasted how long after that one, Steve?
Very short time.
Maybe a year and a half.
After Betty, he was divorced stayed single for quite a long time. But he couldn't afford to get married again because Betty got all of his money.
But then, being the hopeless romantic that Phil was, and if you guys know Phil, he loves women, and he fell in love again and got married again. And unfortunately, he got divorced again. And the net worth did this again. And I believe there was one more after that. And married and divorced, got down to here, and he used to say, and he's the only one who was allowed to call me Jimmy. He goes, "Jimmy, and this is why I still work."
That's why after he retired, he went to work for Tom Car because he needed money.
I can tell you a Phil Toney story that you haven't been told yet. Phil and I worked together at, obviously at Jeep. We at one time worked for the same person. It was a woman named Jackie Woody. Well, Phil decided we needed an articulation ramp so we can measure articulation. So he took it upon himself to contract Jack Roush to build one without any money. No budget for it, okay? So the bills start coming in and Jackie goes crazy. "What is this?" He said, "What's an articulation ramp?" So "What's it for?" "So we can check articulation on Jeeps." "Why?" By that time the conversation was not going anywhere. He said, "You spent all this money." I think it said you spent like $3,000 to build this thing. You don't have any budget for it. So they parted ways, not agreeing. Next time you talk to Jackie Woody, it was like, "Phil spent $3,500 to build that silly ramp, and we don't even use it." He said, "Lowell Babcock's got it." "Yeah? Okay." Lowell's got it. So Lowell comes around and Jackie said, "We spent $5,000 building that ramp." And like, "We did?" Finally, we needed it for a couple of things, and it was okay. But we didn't use it much, so he kept loaning it out. I said the proving grounds used it. Every time we went someplace, the price went up another $3,000 or $4,000 it cost. I believe in the end it was over $10,000 that we built this ramp. But we finally just let it go, and I think when Phil and I left, the ramp was still being used by the proving grounds and was quite a popular piece because we had wheels on it, you could tow it. So we could tow it to events. So it was very popular. but the price kept going up.
And just for reference, since I still work at Jeep Engineering, we still use the ramp today. And we built another one. We have 2 of them now.
How much did it cost?
I think it was about 50 grand. But no, he goes your standard, 20-degree ramp for measuring articulation that was industry standard that the bosses didn't necessarily understand, and we have used that as part of our trail rating stuff all the time now. So Phil will live on in that ramp. It's actually been rebuilt once.
Yeah, we used that ramp for the Power Wagon launch in the press show. And Jackie Woody saw the ramp being used, and she knew it was her ramp. And she wanted to know who let the truck group use
She wanted
her
to
ramp.
cross-charge the Power Wagon.
But it was a successful project.
Yes.
You would not have these nice vehicles with articulation today. You'd be more like a Hummer. We didn't have that ramp.
The problem was, too, that Phil did it on time and material.
Yeah.
And the kid that was in charge of it, Phil would tell him what he'd want. Well, then the kid decided to build it the way he wanted it. So we'd go back and say, do not put a license plate frame on that. This thing never will have a license plate. It's a tool. It's a piece of equipment. And he would just do all sorts. And that took more time. Or he changed the material on the ramp itself. I think that was one of the things that brought the cost way up on it, because it was time and material. And he said every time Phil changed something, it was costing him. Well, Phil wasn't the one changing it. It was this kid.
I guess my relationship with Phil was just plain old friendship. It wasn't working. It was just having fun, and we had a lot of fun. And listening to Jim talk about his marriages, I took a couple cross-country trips with Phil, and we shared ride. Didn't share hotels. He stayed at one hotel chain, and I stayed at another. Kept it clean too, by the way. But I heard all about every single marriage, every single, probably every 4 hours. We start with the first and end with the last, and then get into the new ones. But I also knew him as he was, through the past several years, as he was trying to gain a friendship with a woman closely. So I got to watch those two, watch them build up, and then build up, and kind of like his marriages, just build them up. And we had really nice psychological discussions about the reasons why life happened the way it did for him in a marriage or a female relationship. But I loved him. I have to tell you, I'm gonna cry. I miss him. He was part of our life. He was part of our. We talked to him a few times a week all these years, and then to have that crazy, he was a conversationalist. He didn't talk about cars all the time. He talked about things. And you know how nice that is, to talk with other people about things other than Forsen 392s, all that kind of stuff. So that's what I loved him. I appreciated him, and I miss him. Thank you.
He was my drinking buddy, and we discovered a whiskey called Buffalo Trace. And boy, did we enriching that company.
And his nickname
Kill
was
your grass.
Buffy.
Yeah, we called him Buffy, huh?
And killing your grass.
Yeah, killing. Yeah, we had him over at our house one time, and we had a party, and he had this bottle of Buffalo Trace, and this is soft grass, okay? And he somehow or another managed to fall over in his chair and break a bottle of Buffalo Trace on soft grass, and it killed my grass, probably right around there. It's still there.
Think what that does to your insides.
It purges them.
It does. Yeah, I met PT several years after he retired through my uncle jeeping in Uray. So, I mean, PT was a little bit older, maybe a little bit wiser in life. Some might want to agree or disagree with that, but PT could always tell a good story, and I was always willing to listen to him. He was a hell of a nice guy. But a couple of years ago, we were in Uray jeeping with my uncle and all the people that normally go to Uray, and PT had met this young lady from Florida on the trail, and had invited her the next day to go four-wheeling with us, and I figured she was going to drive her Jeep that she was in, because she was in a Jeep on on the trails. Well, when he showed up that morning, she was riding shotgun with Phil, and to watch Phil fawn over her like a 13-year-old or a 12-year-old in love was just comical. Just to listen to him, the way he talked to her, the way he was explaining how to do this and that, and the conversations they were having when we were outside the Jeep, I saw a different side of PT that was just, it was just
Phil
really,
was
really
in love
cool.
with being in love.
Yeah, I think Phil was in love. That's right. Phil was in love with the idea of being in love. But all the interactions I had with Phil was he was never at a loss for words.
That's right.
Yeah, this is Phil in front of the women, and then night he's like,
And
oh
this is
God.
That's so true.
It is
That
true.
is true.
That's
That
so
you mentioned that.
Yeah,
When we
that's
got
so
back
true.
from the trail that day, he was talking about how exhausted he was. So.
Yeah, that's so true.
But what happened in the
Yeah.
Jeep stayed in the Jeep apparently.
That's right. Yeah, Phil was a southern gentleman. He truly was. But I wanted to share with you the only time we've been on this trail, Phil was with us. Towards the last few years, Phil chose not to do the hard trails. He liked the scenic stuff. And so this is one of the trails that we were on with Phil. But the funny thing was, and I think, is it Dr. John?
Yeah.
He was on this trail with us and he had no spare tire. And we were just like, serious, Phil, you're bringing a friend along with no spare tire. It'll be okay, it'll be okay. And it's like, yeah, just remember that. If it blows, guess who's going to fix that tire, you know? But he was truly a southern gentleman, yeah.
John had no spare tire is because I have no spare tire.
You don't either. Oh,
Yeah, and guess what? After a while, Phil decided that he didn't need a spare tire either.
He didn't carry one.
Yeah.
When he lived at Elvira, he never had one.
Yep.
Oh,
we
my goodness.
well, you know, we brought a tire repair kit with us. What did we put in? One of your friends, put like 8 plugs in one of them in the
That is
sidewall, and
correct.
he
Yeah.
got all the way in.
Yeah, I think my brother did that one for you.
Oh,
Yeah.
big hammer.
Yeah, Jason had that he used that big hammer and pounded your
Yeah,
rim
Phil's
out
big
and
hammer.
everything for you. The good thing is that for these people that run without spare tires, they're blessed to have younger people around to help change them and fix those flats when
Yeah,
it
well, I
happens.
couldn't lift the tire up anyhow. So
I
what good
know.
would it do if we have a spare tire?
Yeah, there you go. I guess that's a point. Yeah, that's a point.
Evan?
Well, in 2010, I was on a trip, same as this, with Phil, Toney, and we were up at, I think it's called Eagle Point, and we all pulled up there. Toney was in the lead, and Phil pulled right up to the edge and just jumped out of his Jeep, and I was just sitting there amazed that he knew his vehicle and where to stop, and I mean, he was right on the edge. And we walked around there, and Steve and stuff, and I took a picture of Phil's vehicle right out there on the point, sitting on the edge. And that picture is the background on my computer at home to this day.
Yeah, I drove a power wagon up on that thing.
Yeah.
Went a little too far. Thump right down on the frame. You should have heard the screams.
Really similar to the screams yesterday.
Something like that.
And great guy to learn from.
But it was,
for sure.
you know, you weren't going anywhere.
Troy, you spent a lot of time with Phil in the last couple of years.
Just talking mostly about girl problems.
What kind of advice did he give you?
Just do exactly the opposite of anything he tried.
Is it working for you?
It did.
Oh, going up the hill? Yeah, when you roll.
How long ago was it we did the Madness?
09.
09. So in 09, this is going to be kind of convoluted. I find a Jeep Cherokee up in Bend, Oregon for Jim for a project that he wants to do, which eventually turned into a SEMA car. And on the way back from Bend, Oregon, I heard that Phil and Dave were in town here in Moab. So I diverted here with Jim's new Cherokee. And as I show up at the parking lot of the hotel, I look down the way and here comes Phil, and the windshield's all folded and broken out. Dave's trailing behind this pretty little red Jeep, and Pro Dog has been rolled. And it turns out the story was that Phil Howell was in town to shoot some pictures and video he was attempting to sell to the magazine the idea of interviewing the engineers of Jeep and what did they do with their own personal vehicles. And Phil was his first victim. So he decides to take him out on one of these obstacles that I don't remember the exact name of it, but it was a V-notch, and he had Phil climbing this V-notch, and he's taking pictures.
Witch's Crack.
Pardon?
I think it was called the Witch's Crack.
Yeah, Witch's Crack or something like that.
No.
So he's climbing up on this, he's got the vehicle up high, and the next thing that apparently happens is someone told him to stop, but he didn't hear, and they climbed and climbed until and Phil got slow motion roll photographs of Phil doing a slow roll all the way down to the bottom.
I was at the bottom of the hill and I heard him scream, "Stop, stop, Phil!" And I says, "Oh shit!" And I put mine in reverse, and he landed right where I was parked.
Upside down?
Yep.
So a few years later, in one of the magazines, I forgot who, had taken license to use one of Phil's photographs, and they had done some advertisement for their product with, here's a picture of the sequence of Phil's rollover and how to prevent rollovers, apparently.
Don't end up like this.
Don't end up like this.
Again, what not to do.
But Phil, being the gentleman he was, looked at that and said, "They used the pictures without my permission." It was funny. But he was obviously only joking.
The first time I saw my Cherokee was with Phil and him. He texted me a picture. No explanation, no word. He's wearing this hat, leaning out the window with a big old shit-eating grin on his face. Phil's in the back. He's there going, they don't say a word. They just send me a picture, and I'm like, really?
Yeah,
You know?
we were out on Steelbender with this brand new Cherokee. It came with some aluminum running boards on it, and I unbolted them so I wouldn't mangle them up. And which, by the way, they're still at the house if you want them. And later on, that car turned into what Jim called Yellow Madness, or what'd you call it? Madness.
Mopar Madness.
Mopar Madness.
Right.
Most of us called it the Yellow Bus because
That's not important, though. What's important is the first time I saw my Jeep of my trusted friend picking it up, I'm like, that's Steelbender in Moab. What are you doing?
Did I bend it?
No, I wasn't worried.
Case closed.
Yeah, and Phil was wearing the hat that Troy's wearing right now at that time, except it had a long ponytail on it.
That's the story behind these hats. Is the red one that Troy's got on now, he got from Phil. And Phil showed up one day with Dan Mick, and they had some of these hats. And almost every time we came to Moab thereafter, Phil wore one of these hats, and that's why we're wearing them in his honor.
Turn around and show your T-shirt.
Here's the front, obviously.
Which, if you didn't know, Phil was kind of the original president of the Lunatic Fringe Club that started, which was a Jeep engineering club.
Yep.
And Phil would only give those shirts to people who owned Jeeps, wrenched on Jeeps, and you went wheeling with your Jeep. So a lot of the vice presidents would want them, and they didn't get them because they weren't wheeling people. So you had to kind of earn that part of the club. It wasn't something you just go, went out there. But part of it, too, was for the Lunatic Fringe thing, Phil's thing was, your politics don't matter, you don't worry about your corporate position, you do what's right for Jeep. And there was 100 people like him those days. Phil was just kind of the king of that and kept that philosophy of do what's right, for the Jeep and the customer.
That was how this group got originated. That started long before it was called the Lunatic Fringe.
Yep.
It was
You belong.
It was the guys that
You belong. This was an engineering, and really it was kind of I won't say a slap in the face to management. They didn't really realize it. They thought it was an honor. To us, we had our own secret club that we talked about what was right and what was wrong. We shared information, and we didn't care what management did. We were going to try and get the right thing done no matter what. Because without that philosophy, you wouldn't have had cool cars and some of the things we did in Jeep.
And Rubicon would have never existed.
Yep.
Yeah, Rubicon wouldn't have existed, but there's some good things that happened with, traction control and things like that. It's because there were their core group of guys that always pushed those agendas for what was right for the vehicle. And there's still some left today, not as many, with all the retirements and the guys have gotten old.
Let's see.
I'm not old.
Actually, Jim,
Somehow I match this,
back to Jim, much to your chagrin, the TJD the TJ Unlimited long one would not have existed without it either.
That's
Because
true.
we had to steal your car and cut it in half to make it.
That's
But we did.
That's another story.
yeah, yeah.
Jim told me one day, he says, you and Phil got to come back to work. I says, why is that? He says, well, you guys left and now I'm the old man.
I like the early version of the articulation ramp.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's incorporated into the.
Yep.
to the
This is sort of a facsimile of the original because the
Really?
gentleman that made these wasn't sure it wasn't patented. It's not. It's something Phil had made up. His friend did shirts. He sketched it up and she put it together on a shirt. And I've got some of the
we all
originals that
got
are
to vote
embroidered
on it.
in. You know.
Yeah, and then when I rolled mine in Kentucky over on its side, Phil made another shirt and took the Jeep and laid it on its side. Handed me this new shirt.
There's another story about that you guys probably don't know about Phil. First off, Phil was very popular with the magazine writers, and when we had a new car introduction, we'd usually have Phil go out because he communicated with them. He's a gentleman. He had to write everything, and they had a particular area, I think it was in Texas or California somewhere, and where they would demonstrate the car to the magazine writers. And he was out there, and they had a Grand Cherokee, and without it being a really big rock, it got stuck on a rock. It was sticking up. Very embarrassing. So they had another press release the next year at the same area, and they got stuck. The next car got stuck on that same rock. Our vice president told Phil, "You get on an airplane, you go out there, you get a hammer, you take out that rock," and he did. He flew out and busted the rock up.
He scanned himself the sweetest job ever. He was the off-road demo display person. He get to go to all these different shows all over the world, meet all these cool people, and get to go four-wheeling. Like, you son of a bitch! You're getting paid for this, you know.
And eat the best.
We're lucky if we get 1 or 2 trips a year, maybe, that are fun, you know. But not Phil. He almost was as good as you.
Nobody.
You learned from the best.
There was Babcock. He was pretty good too.
Well, he was.
Babcock was the king.
Yeah, that's true.
What the heck?
Scams.
Right.
Ray, when did you meet Phil?
And that. So we were at the SEMA show, probably like 98 or 99. I'm not really sure exactly when it happened. But we heard from Phil Howell that Jeep wanted to talk to us after the show that day. And we'd been making a bunch of changes and working with a TJ, and there was people that loved it at that time and people that hated it, yada yada. And we had a lot of opinions. And but what was really going on for me and my brother is we were developing the Johnny joint, but had decided not to bring it because we were working on patenting a patent. Well, it's a small little industry. Well, one of our competitors had copied it and had a vehicle there. And so, the whole Curry camp was kind of up in arms that this was going on. And to top that off, Jeep wants to talk to us this afternoon. Wonder what we did wrong, So me and my brother walked over there, and turns out that we had won a Design Engineering Excellence Award for our rear bumper. And that's when I first met Phil myself. I think John had been Jeeping with Phil Howell on some previous deals and had met part of this group or you guys, but that was my first time to actually meet Phil, and it was a good thing.
It was a good thing.
So, and in that area, he was the top dog for us there, and we became friends, and Phil helped make the fire ant happen with the Jeep engine, because it would have been built with a Chevy engine like everything else out there.
Yeah.
And we had decided just on a whim, I wonder if Jeep would want, if we're going to build it, we're going to build the best thing we can build, if they'd want to help us out on this deal.
So he built a stroker for that?
No, he built it was a Grand Cherokee V6 with a 6-speed transmission. It was a state-of-the-art engine for that and it basically had never been used in an aftermarket situation. So all of the problems of getting the thing to run and run properly and run at 3,000 feet altitude and run at 6,000 feet altitude, blah blah
And
blah blah.
45-degree angles.
Yeah, all that stuff. We were kind of the front runners in getting to get past all those challenges, and then it went on to be a multi-time national champion.
But to build on that a little bit, Phil became kind of a example of how we became liaisons with the aftermarket, because we learn things from them and they learn things from us. And with cooperation, building cool projects and vehicles and sharing information, sometimes legally, sometimes under the table, whatever it took to get the right thing done, it became a good relationship with everybody, a win-win for everybody. Because the aftermarket can do things that a OEM can't, and we can do things, maybe things that they don't understand or why we did it. And sometimes just sharing information, it just worked out, because I know we used, when we built the first Rubicon mules, I think we got a T-case from you guys. That was a 4-to-1, 231.
Yeah.
And then, of course, we built some of our own, and we did whatever it took to get it in production. Learned about axles and lockers, some from you, some from other people, and incorporated it all into a product eventually that became something that was good for rock crawling. But we watched rock crawling competition, and that kind of inspired some of the products you see around here today. That kind of was the benchmark.
Absolutely. The Rubicon.
It's been a good
pretty
run.
much changed everything.
Yeah.
It really did.
Yeah. It was almost the Jeep brand, putting its arm around the aftermarket in a lot of ways.
I remember.
Or at least the users of aftermarket products.
It grew that market.
And that award that you got, I was there. Phil had his backpack on and everything, and he says, and we were back to the room, and he says, never volunteer. I says, well, I was in the service. I learned that. I says, why is that? He says, I have walked around this building so much for this award thing. My feet hurt. And he had to go back the next day and do it again.
I remember when I was a brand new engineer at Chrysler and I came into the Jeep group, and I was working with Jim and these guys, and we came out for the hot trip to Moab to test the Unlimited Rubicon for the first time. So it was the 2005 Unlimited Rubicon, and it was my first trip out here for work, and I was a little nervous because I'd never rock crawled in Moab before. But these guys are great teachers, and they threw me the keys to it was a sport 2-door short wheelbase white TJ, and Jim just said, follow the vehicle in front of you, and if there's an obstacle that, we'll get out, we'll spot you. And I was like, okay, and had a great time. And I said, well, you know what? I can bring my Jeep out here. So the next year they did a vacation with the engineers, like this one. Me and my wife came out in our 2000 TJ. It was a Canadian one, so it didn't have air conditioning, and it had pretty minimal modification, but came out here and, beat on it for a week and then drove it home. And when I got back, I think it was Jim and PT, and I can't remember if you came along, but you said, you're in the Lunatic Fringe now. And I was like, what?
I think the first time I met you was in Moab.
Was it?
Yeah, you were going into the car wash and you had one of the Rubicons, and I walked over and started talking to you about the Rubicon, and you had that look on your face like,
who are you?
I'm not supposed to talk about this thing. Then Jim came around the corner and
Chris, you're part of this group.
Yeah.
What I know you got a story or two about Phil, especially when we were building that old yellow bus.
Oh God, that's such a, I don't even hardly remember any of that. But yeah, I mean, no, what I was saying yesterday was that, I didn't wheel as many times with Phil, but I did, hang out at some Jeep events and got to know him a little bit. But he was just a great storyteller, and I used my fancy word the other day, raconteur. So if you've never heard that word before, it's a good, more official sounding word for bullshitter. So.
But I remember when we had Camp Jeep, Phil would come along, we had those engineering roundtables, and he always came to the Wrangler ones, even though he was on the Grand Cherokee. He didn't want to sit with the Grand Cherokee guys, he'd come sit in the Wrangler ones, and talked about the Rubicon and learning from the aftermarket, and we kind of documented all that stuff. And another kind of joke about the Lunatic Fringe with us was that management didn't want to use any of that data from Camp Jeep. Well, Camp Jeep is really a bunch of families on vacation with their kids. It's not the hardcore group. It's really about, it's really about family vacation, and they refused to use it, and they kept saying, oh, that's the Lunatic Fringe, which is kind of one of the things where Phil latched onto to start the Lunatic Fringe, engineer club, as kind of a slap to management, not understanding the customer and not wanting to listen to real data, because there were some pretty good people at Camp Jeep, and they gave us some good information. They told us what they wanted, a factory engineered package, and Phil helped make that happen. In fact, Phil almost got, when we did the Rubicon on the TJ, there was a plan to put that 4-to-1 and lockers, at least in the rear, in a WK. And the only reason it didn't happen, we had Craig Love, our VP at the time, was ready to do it. There just wasn't enough money, because that was the Daimler days, D-A-Z-E. You know, they were taking money out, not putting money in. So Phil almost got that sold, but just because of funding, it didn't happen. Because we thought once we tooled the parts, we could put them on, you know, some other vehicles, right? So Phil would have been happy.
We stole money from the Jeep group to do the YJ transfer case.
Yeah,
The
well.
Cherokee group.
Yeah,
So
well,
we get that transfer case in.
whatever it takes.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, you-
Say, Lynn?
Yeah.
You knew Phil.
Yes, I did.
You wheeled quite a bit with him. You weren't part of the Jeep engineering group initially, but you become a de facto member.
yeah.
I appreciate that.
Any club that would have me a member is not a club I want to be part of.
No.
That sounds like, you know, Will Rogers.
No, it's I think it's what's his name?
What?
Wrote Tom Sawyer. Or,
Oh.
Mark Twain.
Mark
Twain,
Twain.
yeah.
I think it's Mark Twain.
Yes.
No, actually, I got to know Phil a little bit when I was working, but I knew him better after we retired, and because we all seemed to have retired at just about the same time. But one of the things that I had mentioned before was that Dave Thompson and me and Phil used to like to make a trip every year down to Davy's Jeeps, because that was sort of like Mecca. All those Jeeps, Davy knew everything about what worked, what didn't work on them,
Yep.
you know, because they were all in his wrecking yard. So anyway, we'd go down there, we'd have a great time telling stories and things like that. But my one observation was, when I talked to Dave saved me money. But when I talked to Phil, not so much.
He knew how to spend money.
Yeah, he was good at that.
Explain to him what Davy's Jeeps is.
Davy's Jeeps is it's a recycling center, if you will, but he specializes in Wranglers, and he has a few other Jeeps, but mostly Wranglers.
Yep.
So you can get all kinds of, factory parts, and but he's just got everything down there. And if you have any questions on him, he knows which pieces work and which pieces he makes a
Yeah.
lot of money on. So,
He had a lot of stuff down there.
yeah.
Anybody else got some memories of Phil they want to share?
Well, I remember a vacation with his last wife, who was also a Jeep girl of sorts, and we were out here, and we decided we were going to run Hell's Revenge after we did some other trail, and it was getting kind of dark, and we were pretty deep into the trail, and his wife kept saying, "Are we lost? Are we lost? No, it's right over here, it's right over there." So after a while, he stopped and got out, and I stopped and got out, and we walked over to the thing, and Phil in his usual pose, kind of like this, looking around. I said, "Phil, do we know where we are?" He goes, "I have no idea where we are, but don't tell her." He was not going to admit that he was lost, and we actually saw over the hill one of the tour vehicles going down, and he said, "Let's follow them," and that's how we got out. He was no way admitting to his current wife, to Jenny, that he was lost. So, and it was getting pretty dark at that point. We were kind of getting a little concerned. So, yeah, Phil just calm as a cucumber. Yeah, I have no idea where we are.
Ray, thank you very much for the opportunity
Yeah.
to share our stories with the group.
Thank you.
I met Phil Toney many years ago. He was coming out here with the development group, and they were working on, Jeeps, working on, traction control and all this, that, and the other. And they hired me to lead them around out there on the trail, and take them around. And you know how it works out. People who were customers end up being great friends over the years, You make a friendship that just goes on forever. So that's how I met Phil. He'd come out and we'd go wheeling over in Uray, and he'd come to Uray, and he got hooked on Uray, and he kept coming along too. And he was there last year and told me that he was planning on being there this year. It didn't happen, but that's how I met Phil. One hell of a great guy. Of course, I went back to Detroit a couple times and stayed at his house. Took my whole family back there one time and stayed at his house and had a nice vacation and picked up some Jeep parts and brought them back home. One time I bought a big Harley Davidson from him and hauled it back home behind the Toyota Prius. That was quite the trip. But yeah, Phil Toney, one hell of a guy. So as you know, I got my knee messed up here, and I've been in the hospital a couple times. When I was there laying in the hospital bed one day, I decided to get my phone out and called up Phil Toney, see how he was doing. And he told me he was in not really a hospital, but a facility that was helping him with his hip. He had that hip replaced, and he had an infection in it, and they just couldn't get on top of it. And he'd had it replaced the second time, I believe, and taken out and everything else. They were injecting antibodies into it and trying to get rid of that infection. And I talked with him about different things in Jeeping and Jeep Safari. He said he probably wouldn't make it for that. And we talked about meet him again in Uray this year like we always do, And he said he'd like that. He's going to try to make that, And we talked about my engine that he has at his shop. He was going to go through before we stick it back in the Jeep that's there and other things, And we talked for probably a half an hour or so about all different things. And I told him I loved him like a brother from another mother. I said, thank you for your friendship and all. And I said, I'll see you later. And he said back to me, I'll never forget it. He says, I'll see you on the other side. And I paused for a second and he hung up. And I wondered, what the hell did he mean by that? I am sure that Phil Toney at that time knew that his days were numbered. And he, was I hung up with me in the LDS church. On the other side means on the other side of the veil once you pass away. And I truly believe he'll be there when I pass. He's going to see me there. He's going to be there. And he knew that he was going. He knew he wasn't going to make it to Uray. He knew he wasn't going to make it out here. And that was just his way of telling me. 2 days later he passed. I cried in that hospital for more than a day. Every time I think about it, on and on, about it, Phil Toney being gone. He's a great guy. He's missed by everybody, certainly by me. He had a million friends that if he had any trouble, he'd have called and said, I need help, we'd all showed up. That's a great guy. He had great legacy behind him. Great guy.
Georgia, Georgia, the whole day through, just an old sweet song keeps Georgia on my mind. Georgia on my mind. I said, Georgia, Georgia, a song of you comes as sweet and clear as moonlight through the pines. Other arms reach out to me, other eyes smile tenderly. Still in the peaceful dreams I see, the road leads back to you. I said, Georgia, oh Georgia, no peace I find, just an old sweet song keeps Georgia on my mind. Georgia on my mind. Other arms reach out to me, other eyes smile tenderly. Still in peaceful dreams I see Georgia. No peace I find. Just an old sweet song keeps Georgia on my mind. I say just an old sweet song